Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at Brexit,
Oh, yeah.
which is something that I think we all feel like we know a little bit about, but
Everyone's heard of it.
when you really get down to it, it's
No, it's very confusing.
yeah, we're going to be going through a Wikipedia article and we're going to be extracting some of the more interesting facts.
And there are some really interesting facts in this article.
Because even with a topic like this that feels very familiar, there's always stuff
Yeah.
that you just wouldn't expect.
I mean, I've been following Brexit for years, and even I
Yeah.
found some interesting tidbits in here.
So for anyone who's been living under a rock for the last,
Decade.
decade plus, what is Brexit?
Brexit is the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union.
The one and only.
Yeah, it's actually the only time it's ever happened.
Yeah, and it's we're talking about the period leading up to January 31st, 2020, because that's when it officially took place.
That's right.
And that's what this deep dive is covering.
Yeah, we're not talking about the aftermath, just the road to that day.
So just to set the stage,
Yeah.
this wasn't something that just popped up overnight.
Oh, no, not at all.
Euroscepticism in the UK has been around for decades.
Yeah.
Right. And this is something that I bet a lot of people don't know.
A lot of people don't know this.
But opposition to what would become the EU actually originated largely on the left
Yeah, on the left.
in the 70s and 80s.
So figures like Tony Benn, he was a prominent labor politician.
Okay.
He argued against membership because he saw it as a capitalist club that would undermine workers' rights.
So the idea that this is purely a right-wing movement,
It's just not true.
that's really interesting.
The landscape was very different then.
Yeah. How did it
Right.
go from there to where we are now?
So you've got the rise of Thatcherism in the 80s,
Okay.
and Margaret Thatcher clashed with the EC, which is what it was called at the time,
Right.
over the budget contributions.
Mhm.
And she was pushing for a more free market approach.
Right.
Then in the 90s, you've got the Maastricht Treaty, which deepened European integration.
Right.
And this fueled concerns about sovereignty and a loss of control to Brussels.
And then that's where UKIP comes in. Right?
Yeah, UKIP really capitalized on those concerns. The UK Independence Party,
Yeah. And they were led by
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage.
And they really tapped into this unease about immigration, especially from Eastern Europe,
Okay.
after the EU expanded in 2004.
Right.
So they argued that Britain had lost control of its borders
Mm-hmm.
and that immigration was straining public services.
So they really were the ones who kind of made Brexit mainstream in a way.
They were the ones who brought it to the forefront.
But it was David Cameron who ultimately set the stage for that 2016 referendum.
Yeah, facing pressure from his own party and the rising popularity of UKIP.
Mm-hmm.
He promised to hold a referendum if he was reelected in 2015,
Okay.
probably thinking that he would win and silence the Eurosceptics.
And obviously a bit of a gamble that did not pay off.
A gamble that backfired for sure.
And then he resigned after the result, right?
Yeah, he did.
Wow. And this is another thing that's really interesting that I didn't realize.
A lot of people don't realize this.
Future prime ministers like Theresa May and Liz Truss, they actually campaigned to remain.
Originally, yes.
Wow.
Shows how divisive this issue was.
Yeah, so referendum day rolls around.
Mhm.
Nation goes to the polls, and how divided was the result?
Closer than you might think.
Okay.
51.89% for leave and 48.11% for remain.
So basically, the UK was split right down the middle.
Pretty much.
And the thing that I found most interesting in the research was that support for leaving was actually strongest
Yes.
in the areas that were most economically disadvantaged by EU membership,
Yeah.
which is
Counterintuitive.
completely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I would think that those would be the people
You'd think so.
who would want to stay.
Exactly.
But there was some research done, a paper published in Economic Policy Journal,
Yeah.
suggesting that these areas felt really left behind
Mm-hmm.
and disillusioned by the EU.
Yeah. They felt ignored by the elite.
So it was kind of a protest vote in a way.
In a sense, yes.
Okay, so what about Remain voters?
Remain voters were more focused on the economic benefits of membership
Mm-hmm.
and the UK's international influence.
Okay,
They were also worried about the risks of leaving.
makes sense.
They were more likely to be younger,
Mm-hmm.
have higher levels of education,
Okay.
live in urban areas.
So really a clash of values and priorities.
Absolutely.
So Brexit wasn't just about spreadsheets and trade deals.
It became about identity,
Yeah,
belonging.
and the future of the country.
Exactly.
So the UK voted to leave, and that's when things really start to get interesting.
Yeah, because voting to leave is one thing,
Right.
but actually separating yourself from decades of integration,
Much harder.
that's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, it's kind of like deciding to move out of a house you've been sharing for years.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're like, who gets the couch?
Who takes the...
Who pays for the broken toaster?
Right, and in this case, the House is a complex web of laws, regulations, trade agreements, even shared citizenship rights.
So there's no, like, Brexit for Dummies manual.
Actually, there kind of is.
Are they?
The process is outlined in Article 50
Ah.
of the Treaty on European Union.
And what does that say?
So it's basically the breakup protocol.
Okay.
It says that any member state can decide to leave,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to formally notify the European Council,
Okay.
and that triggers a 2-year negotiation period
2 years.
to figure out the terms of the withdrawal.
To untangle decades of stuff.
Exactly.
So what happens if they don't reach an agreement within those 2 years?
Well, that's where things get a little messy.
Okay.
If there's no deal, the membership just ends automatically.
Like a hard stop.
It's like walking out of the house, slamming the door, and saying, good luck with all that.
The infamous no-deal Brexit.
Exactly the one everyone was worried about.
So who was the one who actually triggered Article 50?
So that was Theresa May. She became prime minister after Cameron resigned,
Right.
and she formally notified the EU on March 29th, 2017.
All right, so May steps into the ring. What was her plan?
She came in with some pretty firm red lines.
Okay.
No more single market,
Mm-hmm.
an end to the authority of the European Court of Justice in the UK,
Okay.
a new trade deal that favored British interests,
Okay.
and crucially, an end to the free movement of people between the UK and the EU.
So a pretty clean break.
Yeah, that's what she wanted.
How did the EU react to that?
Well, the EU had their own priorities.
Right.
They wanted to make sure the UK settled its financial commitments,
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed the rights of EU citizens living in Britain,
Okay.
and probably most importantly, figured out a solution for the Irish border.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Huge.
Why was that such a big deal?
So the EU was adamant about avoiding a hard border
Okay.
between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK,
Right, yeah.
and the Republic of Ireland, which is an EU member.
Okay.
A hard border with checkpoints and customs controls would not only disrupt trade and travel,
Mm-hmm.
but it could also threaten the peace process in Northern Ireland.
Right, because of the Good Friday Agreement.
Exactly.
So what did they propose instead?
Well, their solution was the backstop,
The backside.
which was basically an insurance policy
Okay.
to prevent a hard border.
If no other solution could be found.
Exactly. It would have kept the UK in a customs union with the EU,
Mm-hmm.
and Northern Ireland would have stayed aligned with some EU rules.
Okay, so no need for border checks.
Right.
But this caused a lot of controversy in the UK.
Oh, yeah. It became a huge political football.
What was the issue with it?
For a lot of people, particularly those who campaigned to leave,
Mm-hmm.
the backstop felt like a trap,
Okay.
like a way for the EU to keep the UK tied to its rules indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
They said it would undermine UK sovereignty
Right.
and prevent them from making their own trade deals.
So the EU saw it as a necessary safeguard,
Right.
and the Brexiteers saw it as a surrender of control.
Yeah, it really became a major obstacle in the negotiations.
So back to those negotiations. Were they able to make any progress on anything?
They did eventually, after months of back and forth, they reached a draft withdrawal agreement
Right.
in November of 2018.
So a deal time to celebrate.
Not so fast.
Oh, no.
The deal faced immediate and fierce opposition in the UK.
What was the problem?
A lot of people from both sides felt that the deal betrayed the spirit of the referendum.
Okay.
The Leavers argued it didn't deliver a clean break,
Mm-hmm.
and some Remainers felt it was too harsh.
On the UK.
Right, and of course the backstop was still a major sticking point.
So May goes back to the UK deal in hand,
Yeah,
and Parliament just shuts her down.
pretty much. It was a huge defeat for May,
Yeah.
and it just threw the UK into more uncertainty.
Oh, boy.
The clock was ticking down to that Article 50 deadline,
Right.
and they were no closer to figuring out how to leave.
So Theresa May is back in the UK
Yeah.
with this deal that nobody seems to like. The clock's ticking. What does she do?
Well, she's not ready to give up just yet.
Okay.
Remember, a no-deal Brexit was seen as a disaster by a lot of people.
Right. With all the potential disruptions.
Yeah, to travel the economy.
So she goes back to the EU again,
Yep, hat in hand.
looking for some kind of compromise.
Trying to appease both sides.
Did it work?
Not really. Parliament rejected the deal 3 times.
3 times.
3 times.
Wow.
Each time it just chipped away at her authority,
Yeah.
made the crisis even worse.
What could she do at that point?
Well, facing this deadlock, she requested an extension.
To the deadline.
Yeah, she needed more time to either renegotiate or figure out how to get Parliament on board.
Did the EU give them more time?
They did, but reluctantly.
Okay.
The first extension pushed it to be June 30th, 2019. Well, the UK still couldn't get its act together.
Oh, no.
So they had to ask for another extension.
This is getting ridiculous.
It was a bit of a mess.
So did they get another extension?
They did. The EU agreed to one final extension.
Okay.
This time until October 31st, 2019.
Okay.
But they were very clear. This was no more delays.
The final countdown.
Exactly.
So did they finally figure things out?
Well, not exactly in the middle of all this chaos, Theresa May resigned.
She just couldn't take it anymore.
It had been a tough few years.
Yeah. So who took over?
Boris Johnson stepped into the hot seat.
Boris.
The former mayor of London,
Yeah.
known for his charisma and his strong support for Brexit.
Okay, so what did Boris do?
He came in with a much more assertive approach.
Okay.
He wanted to renegotiate the deal.
Specifically the backstop.
Yeah, that was the main sticking point.
Was the EU willing to do that?
They were cautious.
Yeah, I bet.
But Johnson managed to secure a revised withdrawal agreement.
Okay, so he got a new deal, but would Parliament approve it?
That was the big question.
Yeah.
Johnson knew he couldn't rely on the existing Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So he called a snap election.
To get a new Parliament.
Exactly, hoping for a majority to push through Brexit.
Risky move.
It was a gamble.
Did it pay off?
It did. The Conservatives won a landslide.
Wow, so they had their mandate.
Yeah, Johnson was able to push the deal through Parliament.
And that's it. The UK finally left the EU.
On January 31st, 2020, after years of negotiations and drama, the UK left the EU.
Wow, what a journey.
But leaving the EU was just the first step.
Oh, right.
They still had to figure out their new relationship.
Some more negotiations?
Pretty much, they had a transition period to hammer out the details of a trade and cooperation agreement.
And did they reach an agreement?
They did, but it went right down to the wire.
Okay.
Just days before the transition period ended.
They signed a deal.
Yep.
So what's the takeaway from all of this?
I think the biggest lesson is that Brexit was never just about leaving the EU.
Yeah.
It was about deeper divisions within the UK,
Mm-hmm.
anxieties about globalism, immigration, national identity.
It really exposed a lot of those fault lines.
It did, and it showed how complicated democracy can be.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even simple questions can have huge unintended consequences.
Exactly. And the impact of Brexit is still unfolding.
It's a story that's still being written.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive into Brexit.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your mind open.